BBOR, Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia. And the first thing to say, as always, if you like this upload, you can hit the like button, and if you haven't subscribed yet, you're welcome to do so. But most importantly, at the end, please drop some comments below so we can continue the discussion. And this show now has an Instagram page, BlackBoxNed88. One more time, BlackBoxNed88. And if you follow the show on Instagram, you'll get access to a special bonus podcast talking about music, movies, daily life, and more. BlackBoxNed88 on Instagram. We've been going through some of the things about the Manson family, Charles Manson, his followers, and the events that happened in the 1960s, the Manson family murders, if you will. But I would just like to say that the biggest thing that we have on this channel is just sharing the journey. How do we encounter the information? And that is the only way that I can describe some of the things that we're about to talk about here. So I was listening to The Stones Unturned, and Thomas Horan recommended a particular book, Chaos, by Tom O'Neill. And he made the bold claim that this book is going to dismantle the narrative that had been established by Vincent Bugliosi. So, with that one, if you were to walk up to the average American and be like, do you know who Bugliosi is? Some people pronounce it Bugliosi. They probably wouldn't be able to tell you who he is. The average person, I mean, some people would, some people wouldn't. But if you were to use the words helter-skelter, like, people would recognize that, perhaps from the Beatles, or perhaps they would know of the book that is written about the Manson family murders. And because of looking into some stuff recently, I didn't know this, but apparently Helter Skelter by Vincent Bugliosi is the highest-selling true crime book of all time. Absolutely, it's a very famous and well-established narrative. So I couldn't sit back and just accept the fact that, okay, everything in the mainstream narrative about Charles Manson is wrong. I wanted to know more for myself. Now, if we had to just put a label on the mainstream narrative surrounding the Manson family, I would probably say, if you had asked me about this 7 months ago, 8 months ago, what happened with Charles Manson, I would have said, okay, there's this guy, Charles Manson, out in California in the 1960s. He started gathering some followers. People were pulled into him for some reasons. Maybe they thought he had a bizarre, charismatic personality, and he developed a cult-like following. He really wanted to be a rock star and wanted a record deal, and then he did not get it. He was unsuccessful, so he became very vengeful, and he directed his followers to commit a series of murders that would become known as the Manson family murders. That's what we would think about. But the thing is, though, you go into so many things about this, and you find that there is a bigger story. And another reason why I decided to look more into this, especially hearing something like that Helter Skelter, the most famous true crime book of all time, perhaps, is not very authentic, or that there are serious errors, there are things that are overlooked, or what Tom O'Neill says in interviews is that Bugliosi would just maybe just brush some things to the side. He'll talk about something very important, but it's only like 1 or 2 paragraphs in the book. It's not really expanding upon very important issues in the Manson family and dealing with the Manson family murders and so on. So the thing to say about that is that we went through a lot of things about the Zodiac Killer on this channel, and I would invite anyone to check out some of those uploads. But the thing with that is, like, you really learned that the most famous book, Zodiac, from 1986 by Robert Graysmith, also has a lot of those same claims, like inaccurate information, as well as perhaps certain things are written in a particularly persuasive way that overlook other elements of the case. So I wanted to learn some different things about Charles Manson. I've been going through the interviews with Tom O'Neill, talking about his book, Chaos, as well as we said, listening to The Stones Unturned. But I encountered something that I wasn't even trying to find. It was just a suggested video. I like to listen to audio while I go to sleep. Sometimes I just click the next thing on the playlist. I wasn't even really sure what it was, and it turns out the audio book for My Life with Charles Manson by Paul Watkins, a member of the Manson family, is available on YouTube for free. You can listen to it too. It's divided up chapter by chapter, so you got to see part 1, part 2, part 3, unless you like to be nonlinear and such, which there's nothing wrong with that. So I started reading that book. I mean, like reading the audiobook, if you will. I'm just listening to it on YouTube. Oh, when I was falling asleep, though, I didn't retain a single thing, so I had to go back, re-listen to part 1, and I've been going through some of the chapters, as well as also jumping around. As we said, we can be nonlinear. The thing, though, is, if you're going to say something like the mainstream narrative about Charles Manson is wrong, almost everything in the book that I've encountered so far Paul Watkins' book talking about Charles Manson seems to coincide with Bugliosi. It seems to coincide with the mainstream narrative. Yeah, okay, there's this guy in California, Charles Manson, who developed a cult-like following, and he wanted a record deal. He didn't get it, so he got very mad, and he ordered his followers to kill people. I mean, everything that I've gotten through so far in the book seems to support that. But then, this is kind of crazy. I just decided to look at the cover of the book. You know, it's in the thumbnail every time, and I just hadn't paid attention for a while. And it turns out, though, that Paul Watkins' book has been endorsed by Bugliosi, so those two are kind of, what exactly would you say, on the same page? And let's just leave it at that, on the same page. I don't really know who's been talking to whom about what's going in what book, but one of the claims that I would say about that is we did an upload on this channel about Susan Atkins and the claims that she was making about the Manson family, and Susan Atkins, another member of Charles Manson's followers, was simply a liar, was simply just giving false information. And you can prove this just by watching her interview clips, because she gives inconsistent stories. Her information does not stay the same. Her claims go in and out depending on whom she's trying to persuade. In short, you can see for yourself that not everything she's saying can possibly be true based on her own admissions. Like, yes, she murdered Sharon Tate. No, she didn't. And she only held her arms down while someone else stabbed her. I mean, like, all of these different things are going on. And then one time she even says that she was waiting out front. It's like everything is just so inconsistent. It couldn't possibly have happened. So you got to think the same thing about somebody like Paul Watkins. What I can say from his book is that he seems to really just describe Charles Manson in the most ordinary way. Like, it's just exactly what you would think. He's living on this ranch in California, and there are lots of drugs going on, lots of sex, and that people are just drawn to Charles Manson because of his persuasive personality, and as well as the luring in of sex, drugs, and rock and roll in the 1960s. It's kind of hard to imagine, if you will. But I would actually like to read something about that, about Helter Skelter, coming to us from Paul Watkins. And he's quoting Charles Manson, mind you. Are you hip to what the Beatles are saying? Dig it. They're telling it like it is. They know what's happening in the city. Blackie is getting ready. They put the revolution to music. It's Helter Skelter. Helter Skelter is coming down. Hey, their album is getting the young love, America's youth ready, man. Building up steam. Our album is going to pop the cork out of the bottle. And Helter Skelter talking all about inciting possibly trying to say inciting a race war. I say possibly because you really find that when it comes to things like that, Charles Manson seems rather adamant in the interviews that he's just like, I'm not some type of brilliant mastermind. And yes, he does get up in his own brain-fried way, but like, he's not exactly the most reliable person. But that's one of the things that I noticed is rather consistent with Charles Manson in the interviews. He is very clearly denying that, he is the leader of this type of race war and all of that. But I was on an interview with Tom O'Neill on YouTube, and an individual named Paul Hart, giving a shout out to him here, I would just like to read something that he is discussing about Charles Manson, and then we can see, let's kind of evaluate this. Once again, giving a shout out to YouTube user Paul Hart. Manson himself said in several interviews that Sharon Tate and the others died because of Terry Melcher. And of course, talking about Charles Manson's quest to get a record deal. Terry Melcher broke a contract and sent 3 people to Spawn's ranch with hatchets to kill someone. And that person that Manson calls the blonde-haired, blue-eyed, and his 2 assistants were indeed sent by Melcher to Spawn's ranch. But in all reality, they did not want to kill Manson. They were sent there to record Manson's music with a mobile recording studio in 1969. Someone in the family gave this blonde-haired, blue-eyed person, whose initials are MD, an overdose of LSD, and he freaked out, thinking that Manson's music was demonic, and that Manson himself was the devil. He tried to impale Charles Manson with a pitchfork, and tried to strike him with a hatchet while screaming, "Stay out of the music business or I'll cut your head off." Manson said that Terry Melcher had sent this clown over to me and he wanted to fight, so I ran behind a shed. If Bruce Davis and Steve Grogan didn't stop this guy, the blonde-haired, blue-eyed individual whose initials are MD, Manson would have been impaled. Manson added to Terry Melcher, this guy was the man, but he's not the man to me. Put him in San Quentin and he's not the man. Manson gets very upset and emotional just recalling this incident, and in his 1994 interview with Bill Scanlon Murphy, the event was very traumatic for him. So, when asked why the Cielo Drive house was chosen, Manson always mentions the blonde-haired, blue-eyed man who was sent by Melcher to kill him. Once again, the original intent, according to, this text here, is to use the mobile recording studio. This guy attempted to murder Charles Manson after an overdose of LSD. And that's why Manson says the killings at Cielo Drive were retaliation for that murder attempt at Spahn's Ranch. I mean, that's just something that, someone is trying to interpret some of the things that have been going on about Charles Manson. But the whole point that O'Neill is trying to make in his claims is that certain elements in Helter Skelter were misrepresentations. And he said he sat down with Vincent Bugliosi and he was asking him, to talk about the Manson family. He's like, this guy just has an encyclopedic knowledge about everything. But in reality, he's just repeating things that have been published in the book Helter Skelter and reinterpreting the things that had already been in print. And it turns out, though, that there are things that were overlooked. Perhaps the CIA involvement, perhaps connections to MK Ultra, and how some guy like Charles Manson, who could barely read, became such a master of things like hypnosis and things like persuasion tactics, as well as being informed in the evangelization tactics of Scientology, if you will, L. Ron Hubbard and all that, as well as Stranger in a Strange Land. There are many things that is very theoretical about Charles Manson. And now I just have to say one thing that's deviating from Watkins, deviating from O'Neill, and there is a larger theory that is going on with Charles Manson. It's practically, I was about to say a rumor. It's not really a rumor. It is an alternative theory. And that is that the CIA was brainwashing people into committing acts for them, like the Manson family murders. Why would they want to do something like that? Well, one of the people that was murdered in the Sharon Tate murders, who is perhaps more prominent, is Abigail Folger, who was the heiress to the Folger's coffee fortune. What was the name of her father? Was it Peter Folger? And that they wanted to really send the message to Peter Folger about his actions in Central America. And the whole point is, before we get bogged down on the specifics that I might misinterpret, just the idea that in the 1960s, the CIA was using people as useful idiots. And I mean, emphasis on the word useful. Useful idiot just meaning doing somebody else's bidding without realizing it. And also, the CIA would be using the media coverage surrounding the Manson family murders, as well as the Zodiac killer, as well as countless other crimes that happened in the 1960s and perhaps up until the present day even. They're sending coded messages through the media as a way to communicate with people. But, I mean, this is all prior to the internet, prior to the dark web, prior to, hidden websites that you can only access if you have the URL and such. So, but in the 1960s, I mean, it's not the most outrageous thing in the world. It's very outrageous, but not the most outrageous thing in the world. So, the CIA is a very nasty organization, but are they really that powerful? Well, we're going to have to investigate a little bit more. The other alternative is, you could look at the film Charlie Says, and we did a discussion about Charlie Says on this channel here, and they simply were just like, Charles Manson once went to the home of Terry Melcher, which was actually owned by Rudy Altabelli, I believe. But he went to the home where Terry Melcher used to live, and that he knocked on the door, and Sharon Tate answered the door, and telling him, of course, that Terry Melcher didn't live there anymore. And Manson should have known that to begin with. But after seeing Sharon Tate, he just became enamored with her beauty that he decided to have Sharon Tate and everyone in the house murdered, because if he couldn't have her, no one will. He just thought that she was so striking. There are many things that people will say about the Manson family murders, and I would like to get more into Chaos by Tom O'Neill, because even in the interviews, I really noticed that he is not giving away everything. Like, he really isn't giving away all of the material, and he says openly that he wants people to read the books and to buy his book that he spent years researching. So I don't expect to act like I can, reiterate every single claim that he has made. But the things that I believe that he has said, or I've heard him say, is that Bugliosi downplayed the presence of the CIA and downplayed the concept of MK Ultra, and there really could be more to the story, or also to the fact that Tom O'Neill interviewed an individual named Stephen K. many times. And people might know Bugliosi, but Stephen K. is a guy we've talked about on this channel. He was one of the other prosecutors in the Manson family case. He did not start from the beginning, but he did join in somewhere in the middle. And he also was the prosecutor for the parole hearings. And we mentioned about this when we did the discussion on the episode of Maury Povich, actually. Yes, an episode of Maury talking about the Manson family. Stephen K. was there. And that, according to Tom O'Neill, he got Stephen K. to just not exactly have a breakdown, but just kind of have like one of those worldview shattering moments like, holy crap, I was wrong. There actually is something that we've been, something that we've misunderstood about the Manson family for years. And I believe that it's just the narrative in which Helter Skelter is written is not extremely accurate. And I mean, you can see, though, that Charles Manson doesn't deny everything. In one interview, he says that he tried to cut off Gary Hinman's ear. And I would if I didn't know better, I would dismiss any of the claims about the CIA and MK Ultra as just frivolous, as just people talking in circles. But once you really begin to find out that, now wait a second, sometimes people do downplay the actions of the CIA and MK Ultra. I mean, they really try to make you seem like there's nothing there. We've said this many times on the channel. That is not an acceptable response. All you're doing is saying there's nothing there. That isn't enough. Like, you actually sort of see that the CIA does do things like that. I mean, what about Operation Mockingbird or something? Even, you can see that they do try to manipulate things through media perception. And that's related to one thing. MK Ultra is, of course, about mind control, and the concept of psychological warfare is very real. So I would just say that we are going to investigate some of these claims a little bit more, and I'm going to keep going through the book My Life with Charles Manson, because the stuff that Paul Watkins is talking about is that how he got into it. Somebody who was the president of his class, and he was someone who was doing very well, then just didn't finish high school, got away from it all. What Manson perhaps would have called someone like Watkins, bent but not broken. You know, Bruce Davis, the right-hand man of Charles Manson for a time, and is a Zodiac killer suspect. And the first thing I have to say is Manson seemed to have a lot of right-hand men. Bruce Davis, Tex Watson, and even Paul Watkins is credited on the cover of the book as being a right-hand man of Charles Manson. But the thing is, I can see why Bruce Davis becomes a Zodiac killer suspect. There are all these things in Paul Watkins's book about how, oh yeah, Bruce Davis just wasn't around tonight. Oh yeah, they were going to pick up Bruce Davis from Malibu. And it's like, why is this guy always disconnected from the situation? It's like, he comes into the play and he comes into the picture from time to time, but then there are all these episodes when Bruce Davis just is not present. And we've done one upload about the possibility of Bruce Davis being a Zodiac killer suspect, and I definitely think it fuels the shadow network theory. But as somebody left a comment on the previous upload talking about, that concept, they just said, hey, either the shadow network exists or it doesn't. It's like, I mean, either that Bruce Davis was the Zodiac killer or he was not. And you could compose a very, very striking narrative about how the CIA wanted all of this to happen, and then they brainwashed Charles Manson into becoming this cult leader and organizing the Sharon Tate murders, the Tate LaBianca murders. You could say that. Oh yeah, and then, by the way, Bruce Davis was also brainwashed into becoming the Zodiac killer. Yeah, all right, if you want to do this shadow network of underlying cult-like activities, somebody could compose a narrative like that. But the whole point of Tom O'Neill's claim is that people have composed narratives about Charles Manson, and that a lot of the information that came out was inaccurate. All right, well, that's all for me now. This is more of an introductory piece, if you will. I don't ever expect to just be dropping all the secrets. Hey, I know everything about the Manson family murders. Because when you listen to somebody like Tom O'Neill, he is very clearly saying, even after researching it for 20 years, he doesn't know everything. But that's where we're going to have to leave it at for now. If you have anything to say at all, you can drop it in the comments section below. And if you like this upload, you can hit the like button again. It really helps out the channel. And see you on Instagram for the bonus podcast. Until next time.